Hello, welcome back to the channel. I'm Morbius Head Mike, and today we're going to talk about, this is obviously the Doctor Who channel. Today we're going to talk about, um, I'm going to do something that I'm well aware is going to make a lot of people really, really unhappy. And generically, I'm going to defend the Chibnall era, in a nutshell. But, well, not really in a nutshell. I want to sort of graph out the series in a changing aspect. And I just want to, I want to point out that I'm going to say some things that are going to make a lot of people unhappy, and that I'm well aware of that. And I'm not really out to make anybody unhappy. I'm just out to make people think about the show in these terms and these aspects. And I just watched a George R. R. Martin video where he was talking about the Winds of Winter. Was asking about that, and he was saying that fans are taking art. And we really are. This is not just among Doctor Who fans. Taking art, whether that be books or actual art or TV shows, and treating the creators like their version is the version they should create, and that they are entitled to this art form, to this particular product, and even particular art form in as far as TV and books are concerned. And it can ruin, or it harms the artist. In our case, Whitaker and Chibnall and Bradley Walsh and Mandip Gill and Tosin Cole. And art's not always going to be. Not everything that Van Gogh painted is amazing. I mean, well, that's actually a big statement, but you're not going to like every Van Gogh piece. Come on, let's be real. You're not going to like, but he's still an amazing artist. You're not going to like every episode of Doctor Who, but it's still an amazing television show. And I don't think this entitlement is strictly a generation. I don't strictly think it's millennials. I think, or Gen Xers, I think it's, or even Gen Z, I think it's become a thing that's bleeding into all types of people, because all types of people are on the internet. But, so what I want to try and do today is not so much spend time on the idea of entitlement, but spend time on the series, and really spend time. I'm going to make a graph for you today, or like a chart, and it's going to showcase some things about the show. So here's what we're going to do. Here's how this is going to work out. Here's a poorly drawn line, because I don't want to bother with the word. Okay? Here's a poorly drawn line. And the line, just for the sake of understanding, starts at 1963 and goes to 2020, because we have not gotten Series 13. Okay? So here's the line. And this is the line of the show. The show is, it's a time-traveling show, so let's look at it as a timeline. It's exactly what it is. Except we're not going to go through every single story and every single character. We're going to go through some stuff, and we're going to go through a lot of stuff, and this is going to be a very long video. And I think it's important to make, and I think that it's important for people to understand what I'm trying to showcase here. I know it's on the cheap, and I realize that, and that's fine. I don't care, because it's more what I have to, it's more about what I have to say in the places on the graph than it is maybe even about the graph itself. So let's start, so we have, so we obviously have an unearthly child. I'm not going to write that down. But actually, no, the next thing we have to do on the graph is right about here. This is the line because it's not even. This is the line between the classic series and the modern series. And this line is going to be very important. Now, maybe I made it too close to what I really want to showcase. But, so, one of the points I want to get out is that even though there are things in the classic series that people don't like, the classic series is treated, classics and then modern. Classics and modern. So the classic series is, treated, it's in this bubble, very much like it is the greatest thing ever, it could do no wrong, even though there's racism. And it's, it's amazing, and in a lot of ways, it's an incredible show. It's an incredible part of the show, a piece of the show. And, if it wasn't for this 26 years, these past 15 or 16 that we've had, 12 of those actually being Doctor Who series, the modern era that is would not have come. So we treat this like, and one of the things that happens, and that we're going to get into, is that these 26 years really, to a lot of people, define the rules of the show, what the show can and can't be, what the show is and isn't. But there's a lot of flavor, and there's a lot of depth within these 26 years. These 26 years do a lot of things, show a lot of different aspects. And that's what I want to point out about. That's going to be very important going forward. So we're going to focus, I think, for the time being. So, actually, no, let's not do that. So we know now that, so here's our line for the modern era. It's smaller because it's shorter. So our line for the modern era, why is it doing that? I don't know. I'm sorry, guys. So our line for the modern era is a lot more, what should I say? It's, it's shorter, it's less detail and whatnot, but it's the modern era. And so I think, and this is largely due to, I wouldn't blame it on previous showrunners because it never really said anything about that, but there's this idea that once the modern series stops and the modern era begins, the modern era has to follow the rules of the classic series. And in a lot of aspects, in a lot of ways, it does that. It really does for, the first, I would even argue until now. It follows the rules. It really, we see something in The Timeless Children that is big deal and big reveal, but, that the Doctor's not from Gallifrey, but we start the series, and in Spyfall Part 2, you see Gallifrey. So it's still recognized until The Timeless Children that Gallifrey is the Doctor's home. So that idea, up until, the reveal in The Timeless Children, that idea has been an idea throughout the series, regardless of the version of Gallifrey. It's been an idea throughout the series since 1969. All the way, and even the idea presented in The Timeless Children is, that the Doctor's not from Gallifrey, it doesn't mean Gallifrey is not an important planet and it's not her home. And in many ways it does, because it's where she was raised, and it's very important. It's still an important planet. It's still a huge part of the show. By the way, there's one marker for 1969. But actually, before we get to 69 and talk about the Gallifreyans, I want to look at the Hartnell era and look at the idea that in the Hartnell era, which is another YouTuber, I can't remember who, presented this thought that for, the first 2 or 3 years of the show, maybe even until 1969 when it was revealed that the Doctor was from Gallifrey, that there was this idea that the Doctor was an advanced human and that he was from the future, and that, the TARDIS was built by future humans. And that's a very interesting idea. It's never really directly stated in the show, but it's implied. So we're going to say like we'll see, this is the Hartnell era. 1965. So here we go. This is, I'll even say he's an advanced human, and that, that even shows forth from regeneration, and that maybe that regeneration as an idea for that time was something that humanity had managed to learn how to do, and it was never something from a different species. It was something that humanity evolved into being able to accomplish. So we go through the Troughton era, and maybe he's still an advanced human, in the Troughton era all the way until the end of the War Games. So we're still, think about it, human from here to maybe here, because this is the War Games, so he's no longer a human. So human. So there, that's what we got so far. So you can see that. If not, don't worry about it. It's important, but it's just the idea again is more important than the chart. So this idea that he could be a human, which I know is going to make a lot of people unhappy. He's not the Doctor's not a human, but this was a temporary idea, like so many other ideas in the show. It's temporary. We're going to get to other ideas and thoughts about that as we go down the line. So, thought he was a human. He's not a human. He's from Gallifrey. We don't know that until 1969 because the show evolves, which is one of the great things about the show, is that it's not Star Trek and it's not Star Wars. There's not this sort of biblical. I mean, it is kind of biblical in a lot of ways, but it's not this sort of, got to go by the books and got to go by canon, and this has got to happen, and that's going to happen. So let's move on to the Pertwee era. So we get the Pertwee era in like 1970. Not like, definitely in 1970. So we get the Pertwee era. We go to the Pertwee era 5 years. It reveals a lot. We get the Master, which is another Time Lord, which again, it's a new idea. And again, interestingly enough, it's in Series 12. But again, it did not start in nothing. One of the things I don't like, one of the things that annoys me, even though, again, the classic years are a bubble, and these 26 years, all of Doctor Who canon is described, and you can't go outside of these 26 years of canon. As far as, like, the rules of who the Doctor is. But again, this move in 1970 to create a Master, even though it is a new character, it's a different idea, the Master, or maybe, 71 he appeared, but it's still, 71 he's really in, but the following year, 71 he's in the show, not, this is Pertwee year. So that's what I've written so far. Still, again, a half-ass chart, but the idea is there. Season 8, he shows up, not 1970. Pertwee era starts in 70, Master shows up in 71. New idea, different idea, interesting idea, new character. Big deal to the rest of the series of the show. Just like Regeneration. Just like the TARDIS. Which again, the only thing, other than the Doctor and the TARDIS, the only two things that have stayed throughout the entire show is the name of the Doctor and the TARDIS. That's and the Daleks. But as far as the actual inception, as far as an unearthly child, the only two things in an unearthly child that are still there to this day are the Doctor and the TARDIS, and that's it. The interior is not even the same. Those are the only two things that have remained the same throughout all the years of the show. I mean, making the argument that they might even be the only two things that are canon, you know. That's not true, but they're the only two things. The Daleks is not episode 1. Susan doesn't, you know, Coal Hill comes back, but it's not in a lot of the show. It doesn't really need to be in any of, you know, it's just there as a setting and it works for what it is. So, whatever Chibnall's ideas are, I mean, even in like the 80s, we're going to really jump ahead here, you know, they played with the chameleon circuit idea, and as far as like changing the TARDIS back temporarily, but still, it was in the Colin Baker era, still the TARDIS returned to a police box, and so on and so forth. So that's what we have. That's really the big thing. Oh, the other big thing in the Pertwee era, which actually does come out in 1970, is the two hearts idea. Two hearts. So, again, I am sort of walking you through ideas in the show, but these are ideas in the show that are part of the modern era and are treated like they've been in the modern era, or been in the show since An Unleashed Child. And they're treated like, you know, the Ten Commandments. The whole modern era is really treated this way. I understand that. It's, you know, it's I mean, not the modern, the classic era is treated like the Ten Commandments. The idea of, you know, the Doctor having two hearts, the Master, regeneration, the Doctor being from Gallifrey, so on and so forth. All those ideas, those are like, you know, those are like the Ten Commandments of Doctor Who. But it's important to realize that these ideas were not there from the very beginning of the show. Some of these ideas were not even in the Hartnell era. And so what Chibnall is doing, you know, is the same thing. It's the same thing as, and this is where I know people are going to get mad, it's the same thing as the Doctor not being human. It's the same thing as the Doctor having two hearts and learning that in 1970. It's the same thing as the Master showing up in 71 for the first time. And then you move on to the Tom Baker era. It's the same thing as 13 TB, 13 regenerations per cycle. I believe that's we start the era in 1974. Or here, 74. I believe that idea comes into play in 75 or 6. I think it's 75. So 75. Maybe it's 76. Maybe 76. I can't remember when Deadly Assassin came out. So 75, 76, just for shits and giggles, but I do believe it's 75. So that's when that idea comes out. Again, not even in the black and white era. So we hold that as canon. But before that, right here in like somewhere in this timeline, we had, this is my chart so far. I know, it looks like a mess. That's fine. It's supposed to look like a mess. It's supposed to be a you know, shitty chart. Here in like 70, maybe 74, 75. Let's say 75 again. So we have the Morbius heads. You know. I could always write up top. Whatever. Just Morbius heads. All the way here. You know. Right here. So, having the Morbius heads presented in this era. All in this era. Which, that's an interesting idea because that stated that the Doctor had previous lives before Hartnell, and the idea was abandoned after the 13 lives per cycle came into effect in The Deadly Assassin. So, that's that. Then we move on to we're actually kind of going to skip the Davison era. We move on to the Davison era. Oh, well, actually, the interesting thing about the Davison era, we get to 1982. 1982. So, it really brushed through the Tom Baker years. But we're just going to, again, PD. So here's my chart so far. Again, it looks like shit, but I don't care because it's supposed to be just a rough representation. So here's the Davison era. So one of the things that's interesting about the Peter Davison era is we got a young Doctor, you know, again, really presented at the end of Legopolis, seen in full in Castro Valley. So that's the first time we get a young Doctor, which of course we get, you know, pretty much a Doctor that's younger than him in modern era and Matt Smith, but still, you know, that idea wouldn't allow Tennant, you know, that allows for Tennant and Smith and even Eccleston in some way, shape, or form, in Whittaker too, to, you know, be in the show. Because they're all older actors before Davison. So, I mean, Tom is kind of young, but not as young as Peter. So we get that, and then we kind of continue that later in the Colin Baker era in 1985. Now, Baker's era, we're going to spend some time on. The last two eras of the modern, or the classic era, I really want to spend some time on because there are some ideas that are presented in these eras, some of which are fulfilled and seen through all the way, and some of which, because of the cancellation of the show, are not. And I really think, oh, and actually, before we get to that, I want to talk about the JNT as far as writing goes and producing. You know, so you had the era that your Verity era in Hartnell, and you know move on to other writers in Troughton's era, sort of a mixed bag of writers, and then you get to the Bob, or not Bob Holmes, but Pip and Jane Baker and that writing, Terrence Dix and so on. You know, those. Well, Terrence was even a part of, you know, Troughton's last story in the War Games, but you get to... I've been looking at the ideas themselves more, not so much the writers, but the writers, some eras have a lot of writers that are, you know, write stories and they're short-lived. Other eras do not, you know, other eras have writers that are like, these are the writers for this era. The Pertwee era is really interesting because it has its set of writers, and most of them do not go on into Tom's era. And so it makes that era very concise. It's a bit like the RTD era, and even like Moffat, you know, pre-Capaldi. It's very, these are the writers, this is how this is going to work, it's very set and understood. And so it makes, in a lot of ways, it makes that era easier to watch because it has a story, and the story can, you know, I mean, really the only interruption in the Pertwee era is the passing of Roger Delgado, which sort of, you know, means that they had to come up with a plan B because the Master was supposed to be a part of, I mean, you know, had he lived, the idea of the Master and who the Master is would have changed our inception and understanding of him. So those are a set of writers. Then you go on to the Tom Baker era, and those writers, you know, Douglas Adams comes in midway through the Baker era. He comes in to the season 16 of the Key to Time season in the Pirate Planet. And you have the Hinchcliffe era, which predates that, which is very kind of, you know, Hammer horror and Gothic, and it has a style. So all these writers have all these styles, which again really gets back to like the Chibnall era, which, you know, we have the Chibnall era has its own style, as these all had separate styles of their own. You can prefer one over the other, but the annoying thing is that these eras all get to be seen as a style and an era of the show. This is the show that is Doctor Who. These are all the show, even if they freaking had, things like we'll get to in the McCoy era that a lot of people don't like, and it's understandable. At least the McCoy era is still the show. It is the show. It is an idea of the show. And when we get to the classic era, when we get to the modern era, there's going to be a little bubble in that era as well. But the classic era is a big bubble everybody loves, So, back to Colin. So we get to the Colin Baker era in 1985, and there's not. We sort of have the violence idea, which having the Doctor be violent is such an interesting concept. Upset a lot of people at the time, and also there are some things in the Pertwee era. There's a sort of important British figure who's very critical of the John Pertwee era, and the interesting thing about these 26 years is very focused on, this is a children's program, why are you showing this stuff? And it's kind of like, it's super ambitious in that way, that it's like, okay, we're going to really expand what the idea of a child's TV show is. We're not, the only thing it doesn't really have is swearing. It has violence and death, but it doesn't have swearing. That's pretty much the only thing it doesn't have. It shows you this stuff, it's not like, you don't. I watched the Sesame Street documentary, like a week or so ago, and Sesame Street's an amazing show, and it's an amazing kids show, and it's important, but it's a very American kids show. It's very, which is not a knock, but it really holds, which it should, holds the child's hand into concepts like death and autism and so on and so forth. And that's perfectly fine. It is a learning show. There are ideas that are shown in that show that don't really need to be in Doctor Who. Like, we don't really need an explanation of autism. We could have an autistic character, that would be interesting, but we don't, it doesn't need to be something that's explained to us, and so on and so forth. We don't need to learn about our letters and our alphabets in Doctor Who. But my point is that this show, for being a kid's show, is very in your face. It shows you what's on screen, and you have to, you either like it instantaneously or you don't. It scares you or it doesn't. There's no hand-holding, really. And that's what sort of makes it groundbreaking, because children's shows, in a lot of ways, should be very patient and understanding, and, well, the Doctor's an understanding character, but they should be really, patient's probably the right word, but they should really be something that isn't so direct and in your face, and Mr. Rogers is gentle, Elmo is gentle, Barney, even though, I don't like him, it's fair. There's a lot of children's programs that are gentle, and the Doctor is not. You look at the Colin Baker era, strangulation and violence, that's not, a kid's idea, something for a child to be watching. But it's a part of the show. And it's what makes the show interesting, is it's exploring how far can we take this to where it's too far. And, how far can we take the idea of the Doctor? And that's exactly what Chibnall's doing. He's not being violent or overly violent. But if you look at, I should start making these lines. So we need to have, by the way, we need to have, made my classic line. So we need to have, a Chibnall era line. So we're going to kind of, put it right here. Chibnall. Chibbers. So, here. That's our Chibnall line. So, 85, Violent Idea. Change of the show. 1963. Completely new idea. Never seen this show before. Change the idea. 1969. Gallifrey. Different idea. Change of an idea. Change of the show. Change of tone. Let's see. Go to 1975. We got stuff like, Deadly Assassin and Brain of Morbius. Change of ideas. One idea came before it, and the other one, sort of contradicts it and counts it out. So there's all these parallels, and RTD and so RTD would start here, and then we have the Moffat era right in the middle. So in a sense, this is really the beginning of. So it's like, this is really RTD, and then we have SM for Stephen Moffat. So I draw these parallels to Chibnall because he's the one, him and Whitaker and the rest of this freaking crew on the show are taking so much shit. So, and I'm, again, draw along the line, 1963 goes to, RTD deserves this line as well. So does Moffat. So on and so forth. I get it. Chibnall made the Doctor a woman. The writing, and the other thing is, you talk about how bad the writing is. There's some terrible stories in the modern or the classic era. There's some terrible stories in the modern era before Chibnall took on as showrunner. And folks, let me tell you something. In order to be a great TV show, you gotta have crap. There's no way for you to be there's terrible episodes of Star Trek. There's terrible episodes of Gunsmoke. There's terrible episodes of something like Farscape or so on and so forth. There's even bad episodes of there's gotta be, there's a dud in something like Breaking Bad or even Mad Men. There's a dud. There's no way. The stories that, duds in other shows are stories, if they're not bad, they're stories that maybe don't move the plot along or aren't that interesting. So, I personally, my real point in defending the era isn't so much to, but we'll get back to why, So there's that. I want to really finish out the classic years. We got to really I want to finish out the classic years before I really put on my closing thoughts about this whole thing. And I want to look at the Chibnall era in a bit. So we're going to sort of cross-reference some of this stuff in a minute or two. So we have the violence in the Colin Baker years. The other really important thing about the Colin Baker years, which I want to get into, is the idea of the Valeyard. So that's about 1986? Yeah. Yeah, I think it's 86. How many years wrong? 82 to 84, 85 to 86, and 87 to 89. Yeah, so that's about 85, still kind of 85, short era. So, but it goes to 86. So this idea of Valeyard. Right here. So this idea of the Valeyard, which is this evil version of the Doctor that is between its 13th and final regeneration, which is an interesting concept, something I'd like them to explore again. But again, a new idea, a new regeneration, which again we had seen, or a new life, which we had seen new versions of the Doctor in the Brain of Morbius. So, not a new idea to the show. There was the idea, that you never really see, the other idea is you never see Pertwee regenerate, which really plays into the Chibnall era, or theorizes into the Chibnall era a bit. So, Valeyard is another life that we had never previously seen until that era. Again, not like, different idea, but think of the Valeyard as Ruth, which I know is going to make a lot of people unhappy because the Valeyard isn't seen as much as Ruth is, and I know people really don't like Ruth, or maybe they do, I don't know. But I know there's a lot of people that don't like the idea of Ruth. But think of Ruth as the modern Valyard, except she's not evil. She killed some people, which, it's not a doctory thing to do, but she's not necessarily an evil version. So, again, here we go. Chibnall era. And even Moffat era. Let's freaking, bring the War Doctor in. Moffat era. So, this is how we're looking right now, folks. So, then we get to the McCoy years, which a lot of people don't like. And there's, the McCoy years and fan behavior I really see as a parallel with our fan behavior currently, which is interesting, which is something I don't think a lot of fans take recognition of. And I think they should, because I think it's important. And in order to look at the present, you have to look at the past. And I think that the behavior of the fans during McCoy's era and what they were upset or, unhappy about with the way the show was going, I feel is similar to the way they behave today. Even though I wasn't alive, I see similarities just in what I've heard. So, I'm right about it. So, there you go. That is, that's an important thing. So we're going to look at the McCoy era. And in the McCoy era, we had Ace and Mel and so on and so forth. So that is also 86. This is 86 to 89, I believe. So that's also 86. Unless it's like 80, I don't know. Yeah, my ears might be screwed up, but I believe it's 86 to 89. It show's over in 89. And, yeah, 84 to 86 is Baker's era. So, okay. So, 86, we get some stuff. One of the things I want to look at, which was not presented all the way through in the show because of cancellation, and really the main reason I'm looking at the McCoy era for this video, is the Cartmel Master Plan, which is Andrew Cartmel came up with this idea that, the Doctor is this sort of anti-hero, similar to the Valyard concept, so that's similar to this, but not, his idea is more that he was evolving into this anti-hero, as opposed to there being a life that is this anti-hero. Which is an interesting concept, interesting idea. Again, another interesting version of what the Doctor is, which, what McCoy was going to evolve into goes to the Chibnall era in the sense that it's a different kind of Doctor, which, of course, Jodie's a woman, so that's a different kind of version of the Doctor. So there's that parallel and similarity. And even goes to the Moffat era for the War Doctor concept. I don't really, so... Again, these are parallel. I mean, why am I... Frankly, I'm making this video and I'm drawing this chart, but if you sat down and you looked at and you knew the history of the show, you don't have to watch all the classic years, all the classic episodes to realize this and understand this, because I haven't seen all the classic stories, but I understand the ideas presented in the classic era, and, the big ones, and as well as some of that aren't that big, but the big ones, so to speak, and... the parallels are there. You may not like Jodie Whittaker as an actress, which I, frankly, as far as complaining goes, and there's a couple complaints that I think are valid, and, okay, well, that's understandable. People don't have to like every actor that's played the role. That's fine. I'm sure, I know there's people that don't, I'm not really a big, there's actors I'm like, well, I wasn't crazy about Peter Davison's portrayal when I first saw his stories, the story I first saw of him, mostly because, we just thought that, I'd become such a big Tom fan, and I grew into him. That's fine. I didn't have to like every portrayal. I grew into, I still like, to me, it's like, I still want to know about that era of the show. That era of the show still interests me. It still matters. The story still matters. To me, the stories matter the most. And I don't think the preaching idea holds any weight the show's been a time travel show. If it wants to do an episode about Rosa Parks, fine. As long as it's written respectfully, fine. Which it is, fine. I think it's it's a show. I mean, freaking, you want to look at the 80s era, the entire 80s era, the clothing and the lighting, the look, it's all very glamorous, and it's bright. It's very reflective of the era, which, again, if you want to talk about Doctor Who being woke, again, it's reflective of the era, which is what it's been doing since the dawn of its time. The 60s episodes are reflective of the 60s. I mean, look at the War Machines. That is such a 60s story. So, again, here, we'll just draw some stuff. 70s stuff is the same. Look at the Robots of Death. I mean, that story is... It's very 70s. It looks... The sets are so... I mean, they could have been sets on Soul Train. They look so hip and cool for the time. To a lot of people, they look like shit now, but they look interesting. They look like the era. So, I don't understand this. The Whittaker era is being an era of now. And we don't like now because we don't like the issues of now. Well, that's, people in 1960... There's people in the 1960s who didn't want to deal with the Civil Rights Movement, but it happened. It was something that was going on. And, other things like the Eichmann, people don't want to deal with, like, the Eichmann trial in the 60s, but it happened. It was a thing. It went on. It was something that happened. Not that the show directly reflected the Adolf Eichmann trial, but it was something that happened, and people didn't want to, there are people that didn't want to watch that because it was painful to watch, and it was, it was difficult, and it was something that they didn't want to do, but it happened, and it had to happen, and it was important. So, and there's other shows like Discovery and so on and so forth that are being in their era. I mean, why would you want a show that's made in 2020, shot with, or 2018, shot with cameras at the time and telling stories that are meant for 2005? Why? It doesn't deserve that. It's a quality show. It deserves to, it deserves to be in its time. And we're going to get past this. Woke culture is going to be a thing that's, we're going to move past. Cancel culture, we're going to move past. These ideas, some of these ideas that, people really like or don't like, we're going to move, they're going to be, there's a start and end to them. Even, Black Lives Matter. There's going to come a time where things are going to be enough of a change, maybe not, where maybe BLM isn't as loud as it is now. So, as will Chibnall's era go, So I don't understand, I don't understand this. I don't understand. I've pretty much gone through. If you don't like the Doctor being a woman, well, okay, but again, that's an evolution of the show. People didn't like people didn't like that Peter Davison was young. Like, why isn't that a similar enough parallel for people to understand that this is the same thing it's been in the classic era? It's just evolving. And if its evolution is preachy to you, fine, but at least it's an evolution. At least it's doing something about itself. At least it's having plots and being a show and showcasing some interesting ideas. I understand people don't like things like The Timeless Children because it's rewriting and retconning the canon and all that shit. And, okay, fine. But, the canon was retconned in the brain of Morbius, We're seeing different lives, and at that point, we were only given 4 lives. We were only given, Hartnell Pertwee or Hartnell, Troughton, Pertwee, and Baker. Those were the 4 lives we knew before that story. So that, in a way, is a retcon. Oh, no, but it's a part of the classic era, and it's Tom Baker, and it's Elizabeth Sladen, and it's the Philip Hinchcliffe era. It's like one of the best eras of the show. You can't say anything bad about that era because it's so important in what the show is. I agree. It's an important era. It's a great era. Elizabeth Sladen and Tom Baker are amazing actors. Hinchcliffe's era is one of the strongest. And, the writers in that era are some of the strongest writers in Who's history. But we need to start understanding that these ideas that Chibnall is putting forward have parallels to the past. And that whether you like them or not, it doesn't mean the show's over. It's not like, it doesn't mean that the show isn't the show anymore. It's still the show. It's the only show that can do this. It's the only freaking show. There's no other show in the world that can do this shit. None of them. There's no other show that can sit there and change its lead actor and go on and go on and go on and go on and present ideas from 50 years ago and put people in costumes and remake Daleks and so on and so forth and bring back an idea from an era that, maybe people didn't like. EastEnders, I guess, but that's a soap opera, and, this show, its rhythm is so all over the place, which makes it amazing. It's got this, it's like you watch Star Trek. Star Trek has a rhythm. Watch the original series. That series has the same rhythm from front to back. It's the same rhythm. Next Generation, same rhythm, same tone, same. There's great stories in there. It's not a bad show, but it has a rhythm. Every show needs a rhythm. This show has a rhythm. Its rhythm just happens to be all over the place, which in a way is why people may not like it. Which that's an understandable excuse. I don't like Doctor Who because it's just messy. It's canons all over the place. It doesn't know what it is. And that's a fair assumption or fair point. Not an assumption. It's a point. See, here, that's the rhythm. Want rhythm right here. Stupid line that I drew. You want regular rhythm? You go with Star Trek or Stargate. Rhythm. I mean, universe kind of changed. Stargate universe kind of changed the rhythm. So we got Star Trek rhythm. TOS. And even TNG has this rhythm too, Of course, it's a terrible S. So, I'd really like the fandom to get past this. This piece of paper is like the show. It's a mess because the show is a beautiful mess, like the Jason Mraz song. It's so... And that's why I love it. That's what makes it great. I mean, if you want to sit there and, say the show isn't being itself or what you understand the show to be, fine. If the show is what happened in the Tom Baker era, well, then watch those 7 years. That's the show to you. Nothing happened before, nothing happened after. Those 7 years are the show. And that's fine. Even if you just want to watch the classic era, you don't like the modern shit, that's fine. But the modern stuff's doing the same thing. Take out the serialization, it's doing the same thing that the classic era was doing. It's being all over the place, experimental, interesting, modern. It's being itself. And there's areas that people don't like. I can understand people that don't like the Capaldi era and stop watching the show in the Capaldi era. That's fine. You don't have to like the Peter Capaldi era. But don't sit there and take the Jodie... Don't sit there and take Chibnall's era and treat it like it ruined the 50 plus years before it. That's not okay. It's just an era of the show. That's all it is. We're going to get past this, and people are going to fall. And the thing that's going to really annoy me, and I know this is going to happen, and I kind of will grit my teeth because this will happen. His era, Whitaker's time, is going to end at some point, and we're going to talk shit about it while it's on the air, and we're not going to like it. We're going to move on to another era and another showrunner. People are going to love that era. They're going to go back to watch the Whitaker era and realize, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. And that's what's really going to bother me. Because right now in this moment, myself and other YouTubers and other people defending the era are lashed out against at times because we defend the era. And I'm not saying that, and I mean, the opposite can happen. I could go back and watch, Series 11 and go, this series isn't that good. It's not as good as we thought it was. It steps it up, but it's not that great. Am I going to stop watching the show? Hell no, because I recognize that it's the only show on TV that can do, that is what it is. It is like nothing else on television. I'm not saying there is another science fiction, and I'm not saying there is another great science fiction. I watch other great science fiction shows. They exist, they're real, and I enjoy them. I think Westworld's a great show. I think The Nevers is a great show. Do I think they can do what Doctor Who does? No. Because nobody can. They can stick a million great actors in them and a million great writers and so on and so forth, and I don't want them to be. I don't want every science fiction show to be like Star Trek or Stargate or Doctor Who. The Nevers and Westworld are great because they're not like Doctor Who and Star Trek. They're not space shows in so many ways. And yet they're still great science fiction. And they have a rhythm. They have a similar rhythm in a lot of ways to Star Trek. They have a show rhythm. It's like, okay, this is the show. This is its rhythm. This is what it's doing. And they're still ambitious and they're still interesting and they still tell interesting stories. And that's that. And there's people that watch shows like that and they need that rhythm. They need that steady rhythm, canon, characters have to be the same, actors have to be the same, writing has to be the same writers throughout the entire series. There are people in this world that have to have that. And I understand that, and I get that, and it's totally fine, and cool, good for them. Hell, I could have turned out like that. I could have been somebody that's like, well, I need Doctor Who to be written by, Verity Lambert, or not Verity, but Terry Nation from front to back. I need it to not have different writers, But I mean, there were shows, Stargate had different writers, and Farscape has different writers. There were shows that I watched before Who that had different writers, and I recognized that. And I'm fine with it. So we need to, like George R. R. Martin says, we need to understand that an artist's work is not entitled to its fans. Who owns whose ideas or matter the most to Chibnall? Chibnall's. I could write him, I could sit there and complain all day on Twitter and tell him, this should be the 8 episodes you should do for series 13. You shouldn't bother with the Weeping Angels, or you shouldn't bother with this, or you shouldn't bother with that. And these are why you should write these 8 stories, because I said so. And I'm the YouTuber. That's bullshit. He's got the writing credits. He has, the experience in television. He's made successful TV shows. I'm just some guy sitting in a chair on the internet talking about his creations. Not only his creations, but Moffat's and Davis's and Cartmel era and Colin Baker's era and Davison's era, basically the JNT era and Hinchcliffe's and so on and so forth. And he recognizes that. He recognizes he's not the end-all be-all of Doctor Who, and he's not the only person that's written the show, and he's aware. He's not an idiot, He's just putting it's his time. And I applaud him for what he did with The Timeless Children, and I like the idea, and I swear to God, I think that's an idea that sat in his head for 15 years, or however long, and it was one of those, if I run the show, ideas. He got his chance, he's going to do what he set out to do. I'm sure he had that idea in his head when Series 11 took off and decided, you know what, I want to blank slate this, I don't want anything new, except for the New Year's special, and that's what I want to do. I mean, because you don't come up with an idea like The Timeless Children overnight. To me, that seems like an idea that sat around for years. And there's probably other ideas that will come in his era that are ideas that he thought of a long time ago. At least he thought, at least, if he didn't think of The Timeless Children years ago, at least he thought of how he would like to run the show if he got the show. Years prior to getting it. Doesn't mean he knew he wanted to cast Whittaker. It doesn't mean that he knew that Mandip Gill and Tosin Cole and Bradley Walsh were the actors that he wanted, or that he wanted 3 companions. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means that he had an idea, and so did Davis, and so did Stephen Moffat. And so did JNT when he took over. They have an idea of what they wanted to do. They're doing it, and I applaud them for it. Because I don't want people with ideas for the show or any other show to sit there and not pursue them. Even if they're flops, pursue your idea. It's your idea. You're the script writer. You're the person running the show. Put your ideas on screen. Why throw that opportunity away? And I hate to say this, and I know we have creative fans, but, he's got the job. Like I go get in television and you'll try and get the position. It's hard to get, but try. I mean, you can write fan fiction all you want and do whatever you want, and that's cool too. But this is what's on TV. This is what matters. This is, I shouldn't say this, but this is what's on TV right now. This is what the ideas are presented in this era. If you don't like it, don't watch the show. But it's a part of the show. It's canon. Whittaker Capaldi regenerated into Whittaker, and Whittaker's going to regenerate out into somebody else. And she deserves that because she got picked. She was picked by him. She deserves the role. She can change how she approaches the role all she wants for the time that she's in the role. Those are her choices, just as much as they're Chibnall's choices, just as much as they were Bradley Walsh's choices, just as much as they're Tosin Cole's choices, and just as much as they're Mandip Gill's choices. Now, yeah, are Mandip and Yaz, or Yaz, Ryan, and Graham all, pretty much the same character? Yeah. Is there bad writing? Sure. To make it the worst era of the show ever, and oh my God, this show's over. Oh my God, it's ruined. No. I mean, it might be the worst era. You could still be the worst era of the show ever, but it's not ruined. You can't ruin this show by an era, because if that were the case, that's what happened in the classic era. But that I still believe is because John Nathan Turner stayed on too long. I don't think it has anything to do with McCoy. I don't think it really has anything to do with Andrew Cartmell's idea. I think John Nathan Turner stayed on too long. And that's what happened. And that's what, that's what happened. And it's not, I don't know. I know the show can get canceled and, depending on what it does. But I don't think it's going to go through another 15-year hiatus. I think as soon as it's got, if there's people in this world that and maybe even people at the BBC, their thing is, if we take it off the air, even people who are complaining about that current era are like, well, we'd rather have it on the air than not. And that's the truth. I believe that deep down, if the show got canceled, people would be upset because they'd be like, look, I didn't like this era, but I'd rather have the show on the air. And that's sort of and that's sort of, you're nodding to the people who like the era in a sense, but I believe there's people that like that. I mean, that are like that, and I'm like that. You know, I don't have to like the Whittaker era. I mean, I do, but if I didn't, it's not like I'm still going to watch the show. And my outlook and view on it, and the way I see it, you know, I mean, I hold it as like the greatest drama. I hold it as like the greatest television show ever, scripted television show ever written, ever made. And I understand it doesn't have the canon. Like, I understand it's not serialized like Mad Men or Breaking Bad or The Americans. I understand that. I understand it doesn't have, you know, that kind of an approach. But it's still ambitious as hell. It was ambitious in 1963, it was ambitious in 1970, it was ambitious in 1982. It's still ambitious as hell. And I think we've forgotten that. So, I mean, if you like the video, please subscribe. I'm probably going to do other videos, not like this, but sort of other ideas, talking about other things involved in the show and other eras and so on and so forth. Maybe do one, you know, strictly on a specific era that I talked about here. But I really wanted to get this out and, you know, just show you guys the parallels. Because some people are missing them. Or maybe a lot of people. You know, not some, but a lot. And hopefully these parallels will calm people down. And they'll be like, okay, I see how the Root Doctor is like the Valeyard, or Whittaker being a woman is similar to Peter Davison being the youngest Doctor, or so on and so forth. You know, I'm not even going to bother with some of the other complaints of Whittaker's era because I think they're ridiculous. But, you know, some of the other, not the writing complaints and not the acting, but certain complaints like, you know, what about the young boys in the world? That is, you know, things like that. So, please like and subscribe, and if you think I took things too far, let me know. If you think I was dead on with what I said, let me know. But yeah, I really, you know, so this is how this turned out. This here is Doctor Who. Whole damn thing. Everything here. It's all Doctor Who. I mean, that's the show. In a crappy, you know, outline. With lines and, you know, ticks and so on and so forth. That's the show. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next week. So long for now.